here in the footnote, then one can understand the development of American sociology as a sequence of different private funders and their money flowing into sociology. Last but not least, here are some early names of sociological schools and sociologists at the time. There's a certain geographic divide in many countries that is linked also to different schools. So in the United States, up until the 1970s, you sort of had the Chicago Urban Sociology Community Studies School, Harvard with a theory focus around Parsons, and Columbia since the 1950s, empirical focus, and then also on survey research. In Germany, there's a classical cleavage line between, let's say, an empiricist kind of sociology that is now often called also analytical sociology on the one hand, and a more, let's say, normatively focused interpretative sociology, Frankfurt School legacies. On the other hand, France is organized around the 4 different corners and so on. Okay, let us briefly go then through the evolution of US sociology in the 20th century. So we saw already that there was a tradition of American rural clergymen staffing the often Christian colleges where sociology was also taught as a discipline reminiscent of social work or organizing charities, etc. So before the First World War and up to the 1920s, still there was more of a one-way traffic of sociologists or Americans studying at German universities and returning often as founders of sociology. This holds for probably the first generation of all American sociologists up to Tucker Parsons, right, who defended his thesis, I think it was in Heidelberg in 1929, on the topic of capitalism in German sociology. This one-way traffic soon changed. So after at least the Second World War, at the very latest, then it was rather Europeans traveling on Rockefeller Foundation grants to the United States to get a, let's say, education in democratic sociologist. Christian Fleck, whom I cite below here, wrote an interesting collective biography of this transatlantic history of the social sciences. In the United States, then sociology developed much quicker, right? There was no, let's say, feudal obstacles from old universities, much more flexible arrangement of chairs. And by around 1920, there were around 1,000 sociologists already in the United States. So the universities were often founded after the model of German research universities. At the time, they were also part of the education of the progressive reform movement, right, of the early progressivists of the 1900s, and again of the New Dealers. Yeah, so many of them also had a social science education. And it's interesting to see also how over the years there was a certain radicalization of the discipline of sociology. So I think we all live a little bit in the post-1960s student movement kind of sociology, which shifted sociology much more to the left as a discipline. In the 19th century, still, sociologists was populated by, let's say, many conservative nationals, one could say, including Max Weber and others. And over the course of the 20th century, up to the current day, there was a gradual shift towards the left, despite the fact that, yes, American sociology was funded by all of these large American foundations. Yeah. There was a huge outflow also in the 1930s of victims of the Nazi persecutions, many socialists, also Jewish academics, also academics who were rather at the fringes of the German system, who then had successful careers in the United States and inspired, for instance, the field of international relations, IR, the Gestalt psychology, but also the social survey tradition at Columbia, where Austrian immigrants founded many of these programs. Lazarsfeld himself and others made this first observation that the social scientists of the time were becoming more and more, let's say, liberal in the American sense, turning more to left-wing topics. So the 1970s were also a crucial period for the social sciences for various reasons. One is that it was the peak of the university expansions with very high student numbers. In the 1980s, then also very high unemployment numbers for academics and sociology, but also the beginning rise of a more diverse demographics of sociologists working in academia. And I wanted to show you a little bit how sociology then evolved in terms of the different sections that inform the ASA, the American Sociological Association, founded in 1905. And I programmed this little interactive online tool here, which you can access under the website I shared here on the slide, and which shows you the absolute number of members in the discipline since the 1970s by, and here you can choose all of these different sections that make up the professional association. Yeah, and it's very interesting to see which disciplines have gained, which disciplines have lost members. So over time, I just plot the most important ones here that have more than 500 members. So it's interesting to see how, let's say, cultural, gender, and sociology of race have increased over the last years, a little bit at the cost of more traditional kind of topics. So yeah, we have here the sociology of family, but also economic sociology, which has lost a little bit of membership. So there are different logics of why sections have members or not. I mean, some people don't want to pay, but it's one proxy for you to see which subfields in sociology are relatively prosperous. And these that you see here, despite the different trends over time, have all relatively established strongholds in the faculties of US American, that is, universities, different also in other countries. On the ASA website down here, you can also have a decomposition of the, in this case, doctorate recipients in sociology by gender, race, ethnicity. In general, you see here the trends of the total degrees awarded in the field of sociology. And it's interesting, I mentioned this, right? The peak of the expansion of the university system here in the 70s, a huge decline, so really cyclical behavior. And now we are not even back at the levels that existed in the 1970s when studying sociology was, also just part of a general emancipation, I would say. Over this time period, then it is fair to say that sociology has become more diverse in terms of gender and race in the United States. yeah, even though there is still, the discipline is still subject also to discriminatory practices. This is decomposition then of the student numbers. You have here 3 columns per discipline. That is economics and political science. Sociology is here by a BA, MA, and doctoral degree. And it's first interesting to see that the sociological maximum was in the 1970s. But it's also interesting to see how large sociology was in comparison to its neighboring disciplines, even though economics then took over in terms of PhD. Yeah, nowadays then it's political science that's in the lead, but you also see that the total student numbers are not that different. So all of these social science disciplines, I mean, do have a status then in faculties and among students. Yeah, so this was a little bit the history of the discipline through its demographics, which I just showed you. Another way of telling the history of the discipline is through its topics and main authors. And one approximation is again through the Google Book corpus. And here I depicted one of very many of the classics that we will deal with in our seminar to give you a little impression, perhaps, of their appearance in general culture. It's interesting to note, perhaps, that early founders of sociology, such as Herbert Spencer, that is liberals at the time, followers also of Adam Smith, were among the most important sociologists in the 19th century. That was really a reference point, but hugely declined ever since. And this is very much different than the, let's say, later writers in the 19th century, such as Karl Marx and Max Weber, whose career really took off only in the 20th century, you could say. Yeah. One other interesting, let's say, rise and decline exists for Talcott Parsons and his structural functionalism. We will see this, which nowadays I think most people would consider more as a historic kind of phenomenon rather than a theory that informs a lot of articles in sociology. And yeah, which has even been overtaken by people like Frantz Fanon, Emil Durkheim, or Georg Simmel. Okay, so all of these sociologists are at least still read. Here I wanted to show you another, let's say, frequency chart, which is a little bit more fine-grained than this Google Books corpus, which is criticized also for its perhaps selective choice of books. And one way to refine this is to look at sociology articles directly. And one way to do this, including for you, is to access the full text JSTOR data that you probably all know. This platform, nonprofit platform, JSTOR, offers, at least for the time windows, except the last years. And even for free, you can download, I think, up to 10,000 articles in one sort of shot. For instance, take the American Journal of Sociology, which is around, I think, 6,000 articles or so for this long time period here, 20th century. And then you can perform a little bit of your own frequency analyses of the most important authors as they are cited in articles of the discipline. And when I do this for all of the JSTOR sociology journal articles, and we are talking about roughly 140 different journals in the discipline, then you have a refined picture of the frequencies of the most important authors that are cited in these articles.